So that's some pretty complex stuff we got this morning, right? I would call it theologically thick language. I mean, first we got Paul, right? And he's the example of God's blessing of Abram to make sure, like really sure, that we get his central insight and favorite topic across all of his writings: the free gift of God's grace. Now, if that's what he's talking about, why didn't you just say that, Paul, right? Would have been easier, I think, but he needs to make sure that he's worked through all of the different pieces. And it's a good thing that he talks about it a lot, because I have to say I'm not sure that I truly get it from just this little passage here. It's just a little bit too complicated for me. And then we get Jesus. Jesus is explaining exactly how God's salvation works to Nicodemus. He does it about 5 different ways. I think he walks away thinking what we're thinking. Born from above, born from a dove, being born... What? Right? It takes a while to really take on board this amazing message that Jesus is telling us. At least today's reading closes with the "For God so loved the world" passage, because, you know, we have all heard that one. And we thought we knew what it means. It's one of those verses that we hear all the time, and yet I have to say, in the context of today's reading, I'm left wondering whether I have actually really understood it correctly. So I suppose all we can do today is just wade into all of our confusion. We're in good company with Nicodemus, of course, and then try to see what we can take from these readings. Now, all this language about being born again and righteousness, it's kind of challenging for me for another reason too, because as a child of the 70s, I think I grew up with it being used as this kind of litmus test. Either you're in or you're out. You are saved or you're not. One and done. But as I read and listen and pray on today's passage, the full passage, I think there's actually a lot of language here that's drawing us into a much deeper, much fuller, and longer journey of faith. And think about it, birth, it's never quick. It's certainly not easy, right? And it launches I think Paul really just wants us to know what it feels like to walk through life with that assurance that he's found, that the presence and love of God is with us no matter what. And he refers us back to Abram and Sarah. Now, if you think about the two of them, they were a couple in their 70s. Right? It's not in this passage, but they were. They were in their 70s. That's, I got a ways to go to the 70s. And yet, here's God completely turning their lives around, calling them into something totally new, kind of scary, right? They were being asked to move from place to place, to leave home, embark upon years and years of wandering, and then eventually they would get to settle down and welcome the birth of their first son. I'm guessing somewhere in their 80s. I mean, there's nothing quick or easy or simple or one and done there. It's like you have to, with God, risk. You have to leave behind what feels safe, even if it may feel barren, to sometimes have hope. I mean, I understand this in theory, but I'm like Nicodemus. I want to say, I trust you, God, but I just do not want it to be that hard. I'm not always so sure that I actually want to be reborn, either once or a couple times over, especially not, I don't know, 15 or 20 years from now. That sounds really hard. But sometimes the risks and the unknowns that go with transformation are frightening, and they make us think that that barrenness that we're experiencing seems more comfortable. And we have to be pushed. We have to be pushed to be transformed. Have any of you ever had a book that you had to read? Not a book that you chose to read, but a book that you had to read. I don't know, like book club or something like that. Turned out to be exactly the book that you needed to hear, that you needed to read. Has that ever happened to you before? Yeah, a couple of us, right? Happens to me a lot, actually. But in the case I'm thinking of today, it was a young adult novel that I had to read for my job. It was called The Inexplicable Logic of My Life. Now, the press release that came with this book was that it was a coming-of-age story about a Caucasian teenager growing up in the Southwest with his adopted gay father and his loving and embracing big Mexican-American extended family. Sounds like a great, good story, right? What I found was actually this amazing and surprisingly insightful read about all of the hard ways that love actually can reshape us. And it helped me to better understand the nature of grace. I met Sal. Now, Sal has this incredible loving family, like I said, and his friends know him to be good and patient and kind. But he finds that he's getting so angry when people around him call his dad these derisive gay epithets. So mad that he starts throwing punches with a vengeance. And that scares him. It scares him because he's worried that no matter the good person that he puts out to the world on the outside, on the inside, he might actually be that same abusive man that his biological father was. And then I met Sam. She's an emotionally intelligent and academically ambitious girl. Only she is suddenly at sea when her flaky mother dies in a car accident while driving home from a party drunk. And this is not usual behavior for Sam's mom. I mean, awful, awful, right? And it gets worse because her mother leaves her a message written in lipstick on the bathroom mirror. It says, "Just because my love is imperfect doesn't is a drug addict, and he wrestles with the fact that even after she throws him out on the street, even after she dies of an overdose, he still feels love for her. And at the same time that he can still love this incredibly imperfect mother, he struggles to find himself worthy of love. Now, I have to say, these three kids that we go on this journey with in this book, they are surprisingly astute theologians, even if they articulate it through text stream instead of, like pastoral epistle. Sam, you think God cares? And that's written with the U, the letter U. Sal replies, yep. Sam, then why is the world so screwed up? Sal, because of us, Sam. Sam, we suck. I mean, I have to say, that's pretty much St. Augustine's theology in a nutshell. These three kids wrestle. They wrestle with all kinds of stuff. They each experience a terrifying and painful loss. They experience self-loathing, and together they learn things. Like, you can hate God for what's going on, but hating God is actually a lot of work. And that having someone close to you die, it can feel like your world is barren. But that hurt also means that you really actually knew how to love. You can learn that your parents, they may or may not know how to give, but sometimes they need someone to give them something too. But I think the most important thing that they learn is what came to them in a lesson in the last words that Sal's grandmother, told him. Actually told all three of them. She said to them, "Déjate querer." Now my Spanish is terrible, fully admit it, but I'm told that déjate querer translates let yourself be loved. Let yourself be loved. See, the funny thing about these three kids is they knew how to love. They were good at that, even when it was scary sometimes. But letting themselves be loved, now that, they turns out, takes some real vulnerability. Little by little, across the story of this book, they let themselves be loved. They let themselves be loved by each other, and they let themselves show and share their grief, their anger, their tears, and how much all this stuff is going on for them. And it's more than your usual teenager has to deal with, right? It's confusing and it's frightening. And they wrestle with how they feel less than worthy. They let themselves be seen and held through all of that. And you know what happens? All three of them are transformed. Because they become a new family together, a real home for each other, and they learn how to let themselves be loved. So thinking back to today's readings, I think that might be what St. Paul was getting at. Now, Paul lived in a time when they didn't really think in terms of internal emotional states or interpersonal relationships so much as the rightness of a person's relationship and status within and to the community. It's called honor, right? And that's why he uses the language that he uses, justification and righteousness, for something that we might use the language of intimacy and wholeness to understand. But I think now I see why this understanding was so transformative for Paul that it struck him blind when he finally got it, and then he just couldn't stop telling the world about it. See, Paul, like Nicodemus, had been a person who wanted with all his heart to love God and to know that God loved him. He wanted to be right with God. And Paul had been a person who did everything that he could just to show that he was good enough to be loved by God. But he never felt like he was enough. He never felt worthy. In that moment on the road in Damascus, when Jesus appeared to Paul, he finally got it. I'm good enough for God just as I am. He finally let himself be loved. He felt like he had been given a gift that he called grace. So, déjate querer. Let yourself be loved by God. It changes everything. It changed everything for Paul. It changed everything for these three kids. It can change everything for us. of living into your belovedness. It's not easy, I fully admit. But you know what? Birth isn't either, and it cannot have been easy for God either to keep loving us, even though, let's face it, human beings, sometimes we suck. But God did it. God loved us so much that he even gave his son. So maybe we can risk letting God love us and see what happens. So this Lent, I invite you into this journey. Déjate querer. Let yourself be loved by God and others. Let yourself risk that pain and that grief and that vulnerability. And you might find that there's joy and relief and, dare I say, even salvation that comes with it. But be forewarned. It may change you. It may change your relationship with God. It may change your relationship with people that you love. It may even change your relationship with people that you didn't know how to love. But I promise you, it will take you on a journey into something completely new that feels like you have been born again. Amen.